Have you ever asked yourself what happens when humans clash with some of nature's fiercest creatures? In this video, we're exploring 6 stories of harrowing encounters with bears, from a wildlife biologist's dream expedition turned nightmare in Yellowstone to a family's Christmas vacation gone extremely wrong in the Colorado Rockies. These stories will both terrify and amaze you. Join us as we uncover these heart-pounding accounts of survival and courage. Will these people survive? Or will the bears claim their lives? It was June 22nd, 2024, and Sergei Ivanov, a 60-year-old veteran bear hunter who had spent his life mastering the art of tracking and hunting these majestic beasts, was on a hunting trip in the dense forests of Kamchatka, Russia. Sergei was born in a small village on the outskirts of Kamchatka, so he knew its forests like the back of his hand. He was well aware of the dangers of the wilderness, which was always teeming with life and covered in mist and mist. Sergei knew and loved the volcanic landscapes, lush meadows, and sprawling forests, all, especially since they were home to some of the largest and most formidable brown bears on Earth. Since he was raised in a family of hunters, Sergei learned to respect and understand the forest from a very young age. As soon as he could walk, his father, Nikolai, taught him how to read animal tracks, recognize the signs of approaching weather, and most importantly, the patience required to hunt the great brown bear. Over the decades, Sergei became renowned for his skills. He was somewhat of a legend among the local hunter community. Even more, he was the person you'd call in case of a bear emergency. Even authorities used his skills when they needed to euthanize a dangerous bear. It is no surprise, then, that Sergei trusted his abilities above anything else. He was extremely confident he could take on even the most dangerous beasts. For Sergei, hunting was more than a tradition. It was an affirmation of his strength and courage. Each successful hunt filled him with a sense of power and control, a testament to his mastery over nature. The thrill of the chase, the strategy of the stalk, and the final moment of confrontation gave him a rush unlike any other. The massive bears of Kamchatka were his ultimate adversaries, and he enjoyed every encounter. In truth, Sergei felt a bit like a king, or maybe even a god, every time he succeeded in hunting a bear. That Saturday, on June 22nd, 2024, Sergei set out for what he believed would be another successful hunt. He had no doubts about it. He was going to win this time, too. It was about 5 a.m. when he left his little cottage. The morning air was crisp, the forest alive with the chirps of birds and the always-present rustling of leaves. As he slung his rifle over his shoulder and began his trek into the heart of the forest, Sergei felt alive, excitement coursing through his veins. He knew what he had to do. He had spent the previous day scouting, finding fresh bear droppings and large paw prints, clear signs of a big grizzly in the area. The man moved through the forest silently, his senses sharp and alert, careful not to alert the animals of his presence. He followed the tracks with ease, noting the broken branches and disturbed foliage that marked the bear's path. Hours passed as he navigated through the dense underbrush, his anticipation growing with each step. Still, he was patient. He knew the reward would be worth it. And then there it was, a huge grizzly foraging for food in a small clearing. The bear was indeed massive, its thick fur rippling with muscle. Sergei smirked, happy with the prospect of facing a remarkable foe. He approached with practiced stealth. His muscles were taut, his heart beating fast. He took a deep breath, steadied his rifle, and prepared for the final shot. But as he aimed, the bear suddenly stopped and sniffed the air, its head turning toward Sergei's. In an instant, the bear's eyes locked onto his and a low growl rumbled from its throat. Before Sergei could react, the bear charged with incredible speed, closing the distance between them in seconds. Sergei's reflexes were quick, honed by decades of practice. He pulled the trigger. But then something happened, something that he couldn't have anticipated. His rifle jammed. Suddenly, Sergei didn't feel like a god anymore. Panic surged through him as he fumbled to clear the weapon. But it was too late. It was then that Sergei realized he was human after all. The bear was upon him, its massive paw swiping with brutal force and knocking him to the ground. Pain exploded in Sergei's chest as the bear's claws raked through his flesh. He screamed, trying to scramble away, but the bear was relentless. It pinned him down, its hot breath washing over his face. Desperation flooded Sergei's mind. He thought of his family, his 2 adult children, and his grandchildren. He couldn't die here, not like this, not when he had so much to live for. With every ounce of strength he had left, Sergei fought back. He punched at the bear's nose, a sensitive spot, and tried to gouge its eyes. But nothing worked. If anything, the bear was even angrier. The animal roared in fury, shaking its head and biting down on Sergei's arm. Agony tore through him, but he didn't stop. He had to survive. For his kids, for his grandkids. But the bear was simply too strong, a creature of ancient power. Its jaws clamped down on Sergei's shoulder, its claws ripping through his abdomen. Blood poured from the man's wounds, staining the forest floor. Sergei's vision blurred, pain and shock overwhelming him. He could feel his strength fading away, his desperate efforts becoming weaker with each passing second. The bear continued its savage attack, mauling Sergei with a primal ferocity. As darkness closed in, Sergei's thoughts drifted to his loved ones, the faces of his children and grandchildren flashing before his eyes. Tears mixed with the blood on his face as he realized he would never see them again. Then, mercifully, he slipped out of consciousness as the bear started eating him alive. Fellow hunters discovered Sergei's remains. The sight was horrible, a stark reminder of the brutal reality of hunting one of nature's most formidable predators. The hunters recognized Sergei and couldn't believe their eyes. How could this happen to the best hunter in Kamchatka? Sergei Ivanov, the legendary bear hunter, had met a tragic and violent end in the very wilderness he called home. The story of Sergei's final hunt spread quickly through the region, a tale of caution and respect for the wild. In July 2024, a team of 3 dedicated geologists embarked on a week-long research expedition, eager to discover mineral deposits deep in the Alaskan wilderness. The remote mountains of Alaska, which stretched as far as the eye could see, provided the perfect place for their research. This land, rugged and unforgiving, was a geologist's paradise, rich with untapped mineral deposits and geological wonders. Dr. Joe Martin, the leader of the expedition, was a seasoned geologist with decades of experience. At 58, he had spent the better part of his life studying Earth's ancient processes. His passion for geology was matched only by his love for adventure. Joe's calm demeanor and vast knowledge make him the leader of the team. His colleagues, Dr. Nick MacArthur and Dr. Robert Gibson, were younger but somewhat experienced. At 35 years old, Nick was a geochemist, while Robert was a 32-year-old field geologist. The area of their research was isolated with no signs of civilization for miles, and the presence of wildlife, including the formidable grizzly bear, was a constant reminder of the risks they faced. Still, they were enthusiastic and ready to take on the challenge. It was the 4th day of their expedition when Joe, Nick, and Robert set up camp near a river. They discussed their findings and planned the next day's activities, the gentle sound of rushing water providing a calming backdrop to their conversations. The trio were completely absorbed in their work, meticulously cataloging samples and analyzing data. Their excitement over a promising mineral vein was almost palpable, but it also made them completely unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Unbeknownst to the geologists, a grizzly bear, drawn by the scent of their supplies, decided to investigate their camp. The massive animal moved silently through the underbrush, its keen sense of smell guiding it closer to the source of the mouth-watering smells. Still oblivious to the danger, the geologists continued their conversation. But then, everything changed. A low growl reverberated through the camp. Nick was the first to look up, his eyes widening in horror as he spotted the grizzly bear emerging from the shadows. He screamed in shock. He tried to alert the others, but his words were hard to understand because of shock. Nick scrambled to his feet. Joe and Robert followed suit despite the fact that they hadn't spotted the bear yet. But when they followed Nick's line of sight, their hearts pounded as they realized the gravity of the situation. Dr. Joe Martin, the oldest and most experienced of them and the leader of the group, quickly decided it was his duty to take charge and protect the others. As he reached for a flare gun, he told the others to stay calm. He knew that bears can be unpredictable, and the best course of action was to appear large and intimidating. He fired a flare into the air, hoping the bright light and loud noise would scare the bear away. But instead of retreating, the bear was enraged. With a deafening roar, it charged at the trio, covering the distance between them in seconds. The team scattered. Nick and Robert managed to get away, but Joe was caught almost immediately. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on his arm, and it shook him like a rag doll. Joe screamed in agony, trying to free himself, but the bear's grip was unrelenting. Nick and Robert, in a desperate bid to save their leader, grabbed more flares and waved them frantically. The bear momentarily released Joe, who then fell to the ground, blood pouring from his wounds. The bear turned its attention to the flares, giving Nick and Robert a brief window to act. They fired more flares directly at the bear, the searing light and heat finally driving it back into the forest. As the bear retreated, Nick and Robert rushed to Joe's side. The sight was horrifying. Joe's arms and shoulders were shredded, deep gashes covered his body, and his breathing was labored. Even more, the older man's head was bleeding heavily. Robert grabbed the satellite phone, frantically calling for emergency help. But they knew they were hours away from civilization, in a remote place that was hard to reach even by helicopter. They needed a miracle. Joe's eyes fluttered open, pain and exhaustion lining his face. Joe instinctively knew this was his end, that he would never see his beloved wife again. At least he was among friends. He gasped, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. Nick and Robert, tears streaming down their faces, realized there was nothing more they could do for Joe. They used their jackets to cover him, trying to keep him warm, and held his hands, whispering words of comfort and encouragement. They told him that he was a hero. Joe's eyes met theirs, a flicker of gratitude and pride shining through the pain. He took a large breath, then the light in his eyes faded. It was over. Dr. Joe Martin was dead. Nick and Robert sat in stunned silence, the reality of their loss sinking in. The wilderness around them felt oppressing, vast and empty, the weight of their grief almost too much to bear. They never left Joe's side, even when the rescue team arrived. Their expedition, which they had worked so hard for, had ended in tragedy. The geological community lost a brilliant member, and so did the world. Nick and Robert knew they would forever be grateful to their leader, a person who taught them almost everything they knew about field expeditions. Dr. Joe Martin was hailed as a hero, and his bravery and sacrifice were commemorated by his colleagues and the wider geological community. In September 2010, Mike Thompson, an experienced deer hunter in his early 30s, set out on a hunting trip, eager to bring home a prize and enjoy the beauty of the wilderness. The woods of Montana were a hunter's paradise, stretching endlessly with dense forests, rolling hills, and hidden clearings. It was a land where nature reigned supreme, and the wildlife, including majestic deer and formidable grizzly bears, roamed freely. Mike Thompson had always felt at home in these woods. His passion for hunting and the outdoors was matched only by his love for his family, his wife, Jennifer, and their 3-month-old baby, little Tony. Mike set out to hunt deer early one morning in September 2010. The morning was beautiful. The sun wasn't quite up yet, but the sky was clear, and the weather was warm and pleasant. As Mike made his way deeper into the woods, he breathed in the crisp air, feeling a sense of freedom and exhilaration. He needed this hunt to unwind after a stressful couple of months, during which he had lost his job and had to find another one. Having secured a job, Mike was now celebrating and taking a quick, short hunting trip for his mental health. He needed to be at his best in order to provide for Jennifer and the baby. By midday, the sky turned gray, and a chill settled in the air. Montana's forests were known for their beauty and unpredictability. The weather could change in an instant, and that day was no exception. Mike noticed the sudden drop in temperature and the gathering clouds. Soon it started to drizzle, the rain soaking through the foliage and creating a slick, muddy ground. Visibility dropped as a thick fog rolled in, wrapping the forest in a ghostly shroud. For most people, this would be a signal to stop and go back home. But Mike was undeterred, too familiar with the weather's moodiness to pay it any mind. Mike continued his hunt, relying on his instincts and years of experience. He moved quietly, his senses alert to the slightest sound. The fog made tracking difficult, but he was determined to hunt. As he followed the faint tracks of a deer, he felt a growing sense of unease. That was a first for Mike. He had never felt like that in the forest. Not because he was unaware of the dangers, nor because he thought himself invincible, but because he loved the outdoors. The forest, once welcoming, now seemed ominous and foreboding. Suddenly, Mike stumbled upon a hidden den, partially obscured by the fog and undergrowth. He froze, realizing too late that he had walked into the territory of a grizzly bear. The bear, startled by his intrusion, emerged from the den with a roar. It was a massive creature, its fur matted and wet from the drizzle, its eyes fierce with anger. Mike knew this was an extremely bad situation. He knew that bears are territorial creatures who don't like being taken by surprise. The man's heart raced as he fumbled for his rifle, but the bear was simply too quick. Mike didn't get the chance to fight. Instead, the bear charged, knocking the man to the ground with a force that drove the breath from his lungs. The wet earth pressed against his back as the bear's powerful jaws clamped down on his right calf, sending searing pain through his leg as it tore the flesh. The bear shook him violently, and Mike felt his body being tossed through the air as if he were weightless. He landed a short distance away from the bear, his vision blurring from the pain and shock. As he scrambled to his feet, desperate to survive, Mike spotted a tree nearby. His leg throbbed with every step, but he knew he had to climb if he wanted even the slightest chance to escape the bear. The effort was agonizing, each pull of his arm sending waves of pain through his injured calf. Blood trickled down his leg, mixing with the rain and mud. Despite the severe pain, Mike managed to climb high enough to find a sturdy, thick branch. He hauled himself onto it with a muffled cry of pain, and then he leaned against the trunk, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The bear circled the base of the tree, growling and sniffing the air. Mike's heart pounded and he held his breath, praying the bear would lose interest. After what felt like an eternity, the bear finally wandered off, disappearing into the fog. Relief flooded through Mike. He knew that if the bear had wanted to, it could have climbed the tree and reached him instantly. It was a miracle that it had decided not to. But Mike also knew he was not out of danger yet. His leg was badly injured and he was losing blood. The pain was overwhelming, and he fought to stay conscious, his thoughts drifting to Jennifer and Tony. He had to survive for them. Hours passed as Mike clung to the tree, his body growing weaker with each passing minute. He shivered uncontrollably, the cold and dampness seeping into his bones. His vision dimmed, and he struggled to keep his eyes open. Just when he felt he could hold on no longer, he heard voices calling. He looked down painfully slow and saw a group of 3 men who looked like hunters. Mike was more than grateful to see other people. Carefully, the hunters helped him down, their faces pale as they saw the extent of his injuries. They worked quickly, applying pressure to his wounds and calling for emergency assistance. Mike's mind drifted in and out of consciousness as the 3 hunters did their best to stabilize him. He felt their hands on him, their voices soothing but urgent. He thought of Jennifer and Tony, the image of their faces, giving him a reason to fight through the pain and darkness threatening to engulf him. When the rescue team arrived, they acted swiftly. He was lifted onto a stretcher and carried through the woods and into a vehicle. The thought of his family waiting for him kept him going, and it sure helped that he couldn't feel his leg anymore, despite the fact that he was aware this was a bad sign. Doctors fought for hours to save his leg, but nothing could be done. Still, as he lay in a hospital bed with Jennifer by his side and Tony sleeping peacefully in her arms, Mike knew losing his leg was a small price to pay. He had been given a second chance. He reflected on the experience. He had always respected the power of nature, but his brush with death had deepened that respect. He wasn't sure he would ever be able to hunt again, but being alive for his family was everything he could ask for. The wilderness of Montana would always be a part of him, but so would the lessons learned and the life he cherished. In August 2012, 3 friends, Sarah, Laura, and Chrissy, embarked on a canoe trip, eager to experience the serene beauty and challenge of navigating the remote waterways of Ontario, Canada. Ontario, Canada, is home to a vast expanse of forests, rivers, and thousands of lakes. These natural wonders draw outdoor enthusiasts from around the world, offering a perfect backdrop for canoeing, a beloved Canadian pastime. Canoeing through Ontario's remote lakes allows adventurers to connect with nature, find peace in the solitude, and explore areas inaccessible by any other means. Sarah, Laura, and Chrissy were visiting Ontario for the first time, and they were eager to experience this adventure together. They were childhood friends who loved all kinds of sports and had traveled the world together, seeing and experiencing the craziest things possible. But nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to experience in Ontario. Out of all of them, Sarah was the only one with years of canoeing experience. Laura had taken up the sport in the previous year, while Chrissy, the group's heart, was relatively new to canoeing, but had quickly fallen in love with it thanks to her friend's infectious enthusiasm. The three friends left on their trip, armed with excitement and ready for another adventure. They paddled through the calm waters, surrounded by vast forests of towering pines. They enjoyed the physical challenge and the breathtaking scenery, but it was each other's presence that they appreciated the most. By evening, they reached a secluded island, an ideal spot to set up camp for the night. The island wasn't huge, but it was on the bigger side. Exhausted and famished from the day's journey, they decided to take a break from setting up their tents and cook dinner first. They sat on the ground, savoring the warmth of the food and the beauty of the setting sun reflecting off the lake. It was a movie-like scene, so calm and beautiful, and the food was delicious. But the tranquility of the moment was shattered when they noticed a movement at the edge of their camp. It was a grizzly bear. They couldn't believe their eyes. They couldn't believe their luck, or lack of it. They were literally stranded on an island with a grizzly. Drawn by the smell of their dinner, the animal slowly made its way toward them. The friends froze. They stood as still as possible, barely daring to breathe, hoping the bear would lose interest and leave. Their hearts pounded in their chests, and they exchanged terrified glances, understanding the gravity of the situation. The bear, however, was undeterred, its powerful nose leading it closer and closer to the source of the enticing scent, the food in front of the three women. Suddenly, the bear lunged, and chaos erupted. Laura and Chrissy scrambled to their feet and ran into the forest. But Sarah, caught off guard, was not as quick. In mere seconds, the animal was upon her. Sarah was pinned to the ground, screaming in pain as the bear's claws tore into her arms, which she used to cover her face from the attack. The scene was a nightmare. A flurry of movement, roars, and screams. Laura and Chrissy stopped a short distance away, realizing they couldn't abandon Sarah. After the initial shock wore off, they knew they had to act. Sure, they were almost petrified, but they were also determined to save their friend. They raced back to the camp, their minds struggling to remember the safety protocols they had discussed before the trip. And then they remembered they weren't entirely helpless. They grabbed the bear spray and flares from their packs, their hands shaking with adrenaline and terror. Laura managed to get the bear spray's safety cap off and aimed at the bear, while Chrissy lit a flare, the bright light and the smoke adding to the attack. Laura let out a scream as she sprayed the bear in the face. The bear roared in anger and pain, backing away from Sarah, who lay motionless on the ground, bleeding profusely. Chrissy waved the flare, shouting to appear larger and more threatening. The combined effects of the bear spray and flare eventually drove the bear away. It retreated into the woods, but the friends knew they were not safe yet. The possibility of the bear returning loomed over them, especially on this secluded island where help was not immediately available. Terrified and with Sarah in critical condition, Laura and Chrissy moved quickly. They activated their emergency beacon, hoping for a swift rescue, but they suspected it would be hours before help could arrive, and they didn't know what to do to help Sarah. They had only limited first aid supplies, which they used to bandage her wounds. Then they tried to make her as comfortable as possible. Her injuries were severe, and they could see she was in shock, her skin pale and clammy. As night fell, the island's isolation became even more oppressive. Laura and Chrissy huddled close to Sarah, taking turns to keep watch and stoke the fire, hoping its light and smoke would keep the bear at bay. Every rustle in the woods sent waves of fear through them. They spoke loudly to discourage the bear from returning. They tried to reassure each other and keep their spirits up, but the gravity of their situation was undeniable. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness despite Laura and Chrissy's best efforts to keep her awake. They hoped it was because of shock and not because of blood loss. Still, they prayed silently for a miracle, for the sound of helicopter blades or the sight of rescue lights piercing the darkness. Just before dawn, their prayers were answered. The distant thrum of a helicopter reached their ears, and soon a searchlight cut through the pre-dawn gloom. Relief washed over them as the rescue team arrived, securing the area and tending to Sarah's injuries with professional efficiency. Sarah was airlifted to the nearest hospital, and her friends followed shortly afterward. The ordeal had left them all deeply shaken. They had ventured into nature seeking adventure and peace, but had instead encountered one of its most fearsome inhabitants. They were lucky to be alive. As Sarah began her recovery, the bond between her friends grew stronger. But they agreed it was time to take it easy. and maybe give up on exploring remote places. A vacation to Greece or Sicily would do just fine to satisfy their need for adventure. Ever since she was a little girl, Dr. Emily Cook has always been fascinated by wildlife, particularly bears. Growing up in a small town in Montana, she spent her childhood exploring the wilderness with her family, captivated by the mystery of these powerful creatures. She would always make up stories about the bears, imagining she lived among the animals. Her passion led her to pursue a career in wildlife biology, with a specific focus on bear behavior. After years of dedicated study and numerous field expeditions, she became one of the leading experts in her field. It was October 2015, and Emily embarked on a highly anticipated research trip to Yellowstone National Park. Her childhood dreams of living among bears were slowly becoming reality, and this trip was Emily's chance to observe the creatures and maybe, if she was lucky, get them to accept her presence. She knew she had to be patient, but she was also very eager to start the adventure of a lifetime. Yellowstone was the perfect background for her goal. This iconic wilderness area, known for its geothermal features and diverse ecosystems, was also home to a significant population of grizzly bears. Out of all bear species, grizzlies were Emily's favorites. Their formidable strength and size had always fascinated her. Yellowstone's grizzly bears were legendary, embodying the raw, untamed spirit of the park. The opportunity to study them up close was the culmination of Emily's lifelong dream. Her research aimed to understand the complex social structures and behaviors of these bears, contributing valuable knowledge to conservation efforts. It was a crisp October morning when Emily ventured into the park, ready to become who she had always wanted to be, someone who understood bears even better than she understood humans. The air was cool, the leaves were red and gold. Equipped with her notebook, camera, and bear spray, Emily felt a surge of excitement and anticipation. As a bear lover, she didn't want to use the spray, but rules were rules, and she had to carry a canister whenever she was on one of her research expeditions. Today, she hoped to observe a grizzly bear in its natural habitat. After hours of careful tracking, her thoughts buzzing with enthusiasm, Emily finally spotted a grizzly in the distance. Her heart raced with anticipation as she settled into a safe vantage point, observing the bear's every move. It was a mother bear foraging for food, with two cubs playfully exploring nearby. Emily was amazed by the tenderness and strength the bear displayed. She felt a deep connection with the creature, as if the two of them were made from the same cloth. As she watched, Emily became absorbed in documenting the bear's behavior. She noted the subtle interactions between the mother and her cubs, and the way they communicated through body language and vocalizations. She was so absorbed by the scenes unfolding in front of her that Emily didn't even realize she was slowly moving toward the bear family, closer and closer to the bear's territory. Suddenly, the mother bear looked up, her senses alert. Emily realized too late that she had inadvertently crossed an invisible boundary. Still, she hoped the bear would recognize her as someone who didn't wish it harm. Deep down, despite her years of being a scientist, Emily still believed her soul was part bear. But as it turned out, the bear didn't feel quite the same. The sow's protective instincts kicked in, and she perceived Emily as a threat to her cubs. With a thunderous roar, the bear charged, covering the distance between them in seconds. Panic surged through Emily as she struggled to figure out what to do. She didn't want to use her bear spray, not under any circumstance. Her training kicked in, and she tried to remain calm, but the sight of the massive grizzly barreling toward her was terrifying enough to make Emily reconsider the bear spray. She managed to deploy the spray, but the wind carried the substance away, and the bear's momentum was unstoppable. The powerful creature knocked Emily to the ground. Her face was pressed to the damp earth, her back and skull exposed to the bear's attack. The bear's jaws clamped down on her arm, and Emily screamed in agony. The pain was searing, and she could feel the bones cracking under the immense pressure. The bear's claws raked across her back, tearing through her clothes and flesh. Every instinct screamed at her to fight back, but she feared she would provoke the bear further. But Emily wasn't alone. Her research team, stationed a short distance away, heard her screams and rushed to her aid. They grabbed their bear spray and flares, desperately trying to drive the bear away. The scene was chaotic, filled with shouts and the nauseating smell of the spray. The mother bear, finally disoriented and repelled by the persistent assault, retreated into the woods. her cubs following close behind. Emily lay on the ground, her body covered in blood, deep gashes covering her back. Her long black hair was matted with blood. Her colleagues reached her, their faces pale with shock and fear. They worked quickly, using their first aid training to stabilize her injuries and stop the bleeding. One of them activated the emergency beacon, calling for immediate medical assistance. As they waited for the rescue team, Emily's mind was a whirlwind of pain, fear, and confusion. She thought of the countless hours she had spent preparing for this moment and of the sudden, brutal reminder of nature's unpredictability. She had always believed bears would recognize her as one of their own, and now the illusion was shattered. Her passion for wildlife had brought her to this point, but it was a stark reminder that the creatures she loved were wild, and that they were still animals. The rescue team arrived within minutes and airlifted Emily to the nearest hospital, where she underwent emergency surgery to repair the extensive damage to her right lung. Her recovery was slow and painful, but she remained determined to return to her work, her respect for the bears now tempered with a profound understanding of their ferocity. Despite her ordeal, Emily's passion for bears did not wane. As she healed, Emily concluded the bear had acted on instinct and would probably have acted the same if Emily had been another bear. It wasn't personal, and it was just instinct, and Emily wanted to find out all that there is to know about bears. The Thompson family had always loved the mountains. John and Susan, along with their two children, Lucy and Kyle, had spent countless vacations hiking, skiing, and exploring the great outdoors. This year, they decided to spend Christmas in a remote cabin in the Colorado Rockies, a beautiful location that promised a serene and snowy holiday. The Colorado Rockies, with their rugged peaks and forests, offered a breathtaking backdrop for the holiday season. The cabin, located on a hillside with a stunning view of the snow-covered landscape, was cozy and welcoming. It had a stone fireplace, wooden beams, and large windows that framed the majestic scenery outside. The Thompsons decorated the cabin with twinkling lights and a small Christmas tree, creating a warm and festive atmosphere. They had the time of their lives decorating, but the best was yet to come. Christmas morning in the cozy cabin was bound to be wonderful. On Christmas Eve, the family was gathered in the living room, the fire crackling merrily in the hearth. Lucy and Kyle were busy playing Monopoly on the floor, while Susan was in the kitchen, preparing hot cocoa and baking cookies in the small oven. John was reading a book in an armchair, enjoying the peaceful ambiance. Snow gently fell outside, adding to the magic of the evening. The night was movie-like, and none of them could imagine anything would destroy its peace. And that's exactly when they heard a loud crash. All of a sudden, the front door burst open, and a large black bear lumbered into the cabin, drawn by the scent of food and the promise of warmth. The family froze in shock, not quite grasping what they were seeing. First of all, wasn't the bear supposed to be hibernating? And how did it get to the cabin? But there was hardly any time for questions. The bear, hungry, fierce, and desperate, began ransacking the cabin, knocking over furniture and ripping through cupboards. John sprang into action, grabbing the fireplace poker. He signaled Susan to take the kids and hide. Susan ushered Lucy and Kyle into a back room, her heart pounding with fear. Was this the right thing to do? Should she leave John to face the bear by himself? John turned toward the bear, brandishing the poker, trying to appear as intimidating as possible. But the bear wasn't impressed. Instead, it stopped in its tracks and then started advancing toward John with a menacing gaze. John leaped forward and swung the poker, striking the bear on its side, but the blow only seemed to anger it. The bear swiped at John with its massive paw, sending him sprawling to the floor. Pain shot through his arm as the bear's claws raked across his skin, leaving shallow but painful gashes. John scrambled to his feet, positioning himself between the bear and the door to the back room where his family was hiding. He swung the poker again, more determined to protect his family than ever. The bear lunged, jaws snapping, but John managed to dodge, narrowly avoiding another swipe. In the chaos, Susan peeked out from the back room, her face pale with terror. She begged John to run. Realizing they needed to escape, John backed toward the kitchen, keeping his eyes on the bear. He grabbed a chair, hurling it at the bear to create a distraction. He shouted for his family to run. Sarah and the kids bolted for the back door, and John followed, slamming the door behind them. They stumbled through the snow, breathless and scared, making their way to the car parked outside. John unlocked the doors and the family piled in, each of them eager to escape the terrifying animal. They slammed the doors shut, hearts racing. Inside the car, they huddled together, catching their breath. Susan used her cell phone to call the authorities, her fingers trembling as she dialed. John held Susan and the kids, reassuring them. They were safe, and he was lucky to be alive. He had some scratches, but nothing more. The Rangers arrived quickly, their vehicle's lights cutting through the darkness. They approached the cabin cautiously, armed with tranquilizer guns. The bear, still inside, was wreaking havoc on the cabin, but the Rangers managed to tranquilize it. They removed the bear from the cabin, ensuring it would be relocated far from human habitation. Meanwhile, a paramedic attended to John's injuries, cleaning and bandaging the shallow cuts on his arm. John, as the antiseptic stung, he glanced at his family and thanked God they were okay. As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of their ordeal set in. The once cozy cabin was now a scene of chaos, and their holiday plans were in tatters. But the family was safe, and that was what mattered most. They decided to spend the rest of the night in a nearby lodge, the warmth and safety of the place providing a stark contrast to the terror they had just experienced. Despite the fear and the unexpected turn of events, the Thompsons grew closer as a family, and Christmas dinner, as far as possible from the crazed bear, was the best meal of their lives.